In 2021, before I ever had a YouTube channel, I used to spend most weekends out in the hills with my friend, Evan Mercer. Neither of us were thrill seekers in the traditional sense. We didn't break into buildings or sneak around city tunnels, nothing crazy. But we were obsessed with those forgotten structures you only find far from civilization. Weather stations, trail cabins, old mining shacks. The kind of places nature slowly repossesses. One night in late August, Evan sent me a link to a nearly dead discussion thread he'd stumbled across on a small forum for abandoned locations in the Northwest. Someone had posted a blurry picture of an old fire assessment shelter in the Pine Gulch Reserve, way out in the mountains. The poster didn't include a map, just a warning that the place was for people who know how to be respectful and wasn't meant to be shared publicly. But Evan, being Evan, reached out privately. And somehow, after a day of back and forth, the guy finally agreed to send exact coordinates on one condition. Don't post the location. Don't hand it out. People ruin places like this. We had no intention of doing that anyway. We cross-checked the coordinates on satellite view, and sure enough, there was a small square roof barely peeking through the tree canopy. No obvious trail leading to it. No right UPS online. No photos except that one grainy shot. Felt like we had stumbled onto something forgotten. We left the next Monday morning before sunrise, driving 3 hours into the hills, then parking at a lonely pull-off surrounded by pine and deadfall. The forest felt wrong the moment we stepped out of the car. I don't mean dramatic horror movie wrong, just heavy, too quiet, air thick with that unshakable pressure you feel right before a storm, except the sky above was perfectly clear. "Tell me you feel that," I muttered. Evan nodded immediately. "Yeah, but we've come this far." There was no path at all, just the arrow on the GPS. We bushwhacked for over an hour, weaving between dark pines and old trees bent like they'd survived some forgotten storm. What unsettled me most was the total lack of clues that we were nearing anything man-made. Usually you start seeing old cut stumps, discarded nails, the shape of a footpath, even the smell changes. But nothing. No sounds except our footsteps. No birds. It wasn't until we were maybe 20 yards from it that the structure appeared, like it had materialized out of thin air the moment we entered its little clearing. A squat building sat crookedly on the ridge, more cabin than tower. It looked like the mountain had been trying to swallow it for decades. Shattered windows, warped boards, a roof sagging inward. The whole thing leaned just enough to make you subconsciously step back. Evan grinned despite the tension. "Dude, it exists." I didn't respond at first. Something about the place made my stomach clench. But I forced a smile and followed him inside after he gave the door a knock. The interior was darker than it should have been considering the number of windows. The grime coated so thickly across the glass that even daylight felt muted. Debris lay everywhere. Rusted pliers, a ruined sleeping pad, some metal scraps, and cans so old the labels had rotted away. But the thing that froze us both was a sheet of printer-bright paper taped to the far wall. Completely clean, definitely recent. 3 words were typed in the center. "Hope you're satisfied." Not handwritten, not smeared or dusty, just freshly placed. Evan snorted nervously. Probably the guy from the forum screwing with us. Maybe, but it didn't feel like a joke. The phrasing didn't feel playful. It felt like a warning someone had given up on delivering politely. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, we had already decided to spend the night inside. We'd camped in abandoned cabins dozens of times. This wasn't new for us, so I boiled some instant noodles while Evan scrolled through photos he'd taken. But again, neither of us felt like talking. We barely spoke all evening. It was like we were both waiting for the other to mention the weird air, or that note, or the heaviness outside. Around midnight, we finally settled into our sleeping bags. When I woke, there was no sense of how long I'd slept. just pitch blackness and the faint creaking of old timber. But something was wrong, something subtle but instantly noticeable. The room felt emptier. I rolled over and my heart lurched. Evan's sleeping bag was empty. I sat up instantly. Evan, nothing. Evan. A dull, single thud hit the roof, then another. Slow, as if something small was moving above us. I stared at the ceiling, barely breathing, as the quiet thuds crept across the boards. The door swung open so violently I almost screamed, but it was just Evan, silhouette framed by the moonlight. He looked startled to see me awake. "Dude, relax," he whispered. "I just went to take a piss. Did you see anything on the roof?" He stared at me like I was speaking gibberish. Still shaken, I followed him outside. Nothing. No tracks. No sounds. No branches near enough to drop debris. We eventually went back in and forced ourselves to sleep. But the next day, the forest felt even more wrong, like someone had turned the volume of the world all the way down. We hiked the area, but found nothing except the same twisted pines and lifeless ground. By sundown, we approached the cabin again. Evan went to close the door behind us, but stopped, completely frozen. I stepped beside him and looked out. A man stood at the tree line about 40 feet away, tall, unkempt hair, patchy beard, gray lumber jacket, a rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. At first glance, he looked like an ordinary hunter, but then he lifted his head. His eyes looked hollow, not angry, not curious, just devoid of anything. "Hey!" I called out, instantly regretting it. "Are you all right?" He didn't answer. He didn't even acknowledge my voice. After several seconds, he simply turned and walked straight into the trees. No hesitation, no glance back, just gone. We tried to brush it off, cooked dinner, talked quietly about leaving the next morning. But even as we talked, I saw a flicker of movement pass over Evan's face, like a shadow sliding across him. I whipped around. Through the thick, fogged window, a shape glided along the outside wall, tall enough to block half the pane, too slow to be an animal. Evan said nothing, which meant he'd seen it too. The shadow moved toward the front door. 3 soft knocks followed. Evan slammed the bolt shut instantly. Silence. Then 3 violent, bone-rattling bangs shook the entire door. We froze, barely breathing. Then nothing. No steps. No voice. No more shadows. We waited what felt like hours before Evan unlocked the door. No tracks. No figure. Nothing disturbed except our nerves. We stayed awake the entire night, backs pressed to the wall, listening to every groan of the old cabin, convinced each one meant something. When dawn finally hit, we bolted. Didn't pack properly. Didn't look back. That whole forest felt alive and watching. When we got back to the car, I messaged the guy from the forum asking if he'd experienced anything odd out there. But the thread was gone. The username deleted. No trace. I think he left that note for a reason. I think he wanted someone to know. And whatever we encountered in Pine Gulch, it wasn't finished with that place. After that morning in Pine Gulch, Evan and I didn't speak much about what happened for weeks. We both knew we'd experienced something beyond explanation, and the silence between us seemed safer than trying to put it into words. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I started researching every scrap of history I could find about the cabin and the surrounding area. Nothing. No record of who built it, who used it, or why it was left completely forgotten. Even the Forest Service files were sparse, mostly just blank entries about obsolete structures in the early 1970s. A few months later, I convinced Evan to go back, not to stay in the cabin, but to try and document the area in daylight. The forest felt more normal in the sun, but there was still a subtle tension, like it remembered our last visit. We circled the clearing, examined the outside, and even found a small metal hatch near the base, hidden under moss and debris. My gut clenched. The cellar. It was locked or maybe jammed with rust. I couldn't open it. But the ground around it was disturbed, almost as if someone had been crawling in and out recently. Mud tracks ran from the hatch to the edge of the clearing, then disappeared into the underbrush. My stomach dropped when I realized there was no logical way someone could have moved in and out without us noticing the first night. That evening, as we packed up to leave, I spotted movement at the tree line again. This time it was a figure crouched low, just barely visible among the shadows. Not running, not walking, just watching. I pointed it out to Evan. He froze pale. The figure didn't respond, didn't make a sound, and then vanished, leaving only a ripple of unease in its wake. We didn't stop to investigate. We left quickly, keeping our eyes on the tree line until we were back on the main trail. The unease didn't fade even after we reached the car. It felt like something was still following, still observing, waiting for the next time someone dared enter that clearing. Weeks later, I spoke to a retired forest ranger named Colton Hayes, someone who had worked in the Pine Gulch area for decades. I carefully avoided giving him the exact location. When I mentioned the cabin and the strange events, his expression shifted. "You're lucky to be alive," he said quietly. "There's things out there you don't want to meet. We've had incidents, mostly disappearances, dating back decades. That structure, people leave it alone for a reason. They've tried to contain it, but sometimes it escapes notice. I wouldn't go back if I were you." I pressed him for details, but he only shook his head and warned me again. He mentioned names that had been missing for years, hunters, campers, even rangers, but the records were incomplete. Everything brushed under the table. Something about that area had always been different, he said, but no one ever put it in writing. I never went back to Pine Gulch. Evan and I explored other abandoned places after that, but we both silently agreed that the cabin was off limits forever. Every so often, I still dream about the hollow-eyed figure standing at the clearing, the shadow sliding along the wall, and the 3 words on the paper, "Hope you're satisfied." Years later, I realized that our experience wasn't just about fear. It was a warning, a message from whatever still inhabits that forgotten ridge. And deep down, I know it's still watching, still waiting for the next person to stumble into its clearing, curious and unprepared. Even now, I keep a small map of Pine Gulch in my mind, a mental marker to never go back. Because some places, no matter how tempting or forgotten, are better left alone. Hello. Welcome to Black Screen Stories, where true scary stories told in the rain. These scary stories for sleeping are meant to give you chills just before you drift into a peaceful sleep. If you'd like to support the channel, please give your feedback and opinions in the comment. It really helps me out. I hope you enjoy the video and fall asleep fast. Thank you for being here. Tonight we are listening 3 creepy true fire lookout horror stories. Now let's move to the next story. It was early spring of 2023 when my cousin Maya called me out of the blue, insisting I join her on a weekend trip. She had found a listing in a local history forum about a defunct fire observation hut in the Cedar Ridge Mountains, not far from the state line. The place was supposedly abandoned for decades, and only a handful of people had ever claimed to visit it. She said she wanted a quiet escape from the city, and I thought it sounded like an adventure, nothing extreme. We set off Friday morning, leaving the car at the edge of a gravel logging road. The directions were vague, and even Google Maps barely registered the area. That was part of the thrill. From the start, the forest was unusually dense, the kind where every step feels like the trees are inching closer. The air smelled damp, earthy, and just faintly metallic, like the forest had absorbed decades of storms and forgotten fires. The hike was longer than expected, The trail, if you could call it that, was more of a faint indentation in the moss-covered ground than an actual path. Every so often, I would catch glimpses of the hut in satellite images, but in real life, it seemed almost impossibly hidden. Finally, just as the sun dipped toward late afternoon, we broke through a line of pines and stumbled into a small clearing. The hut was there, small, squat, and gray with weathered wood, leaning slightly as if it had been nudged by the mountain itself. Broken windows glinted faintly where the sun struck them, and one corner of the roof sagged so low it looked like it could collapse under the weight of a heavy snowstorm. Maya immediately ran to the door, brushing aside broken branches and debris. The interior was darker than expected, though sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls. Inside, there were remnants of its former use. An old metal stove in one corner, a collapsed bunk, and a scattering of papers and cans. But one thing stood out among the dust and decay: a small, sealed envelope taped to a beam near the ceiling. No handwriting, no stamp, just 3 letters printed in bold. Black ink. See you. Maya froze, pale. Is this some kind of joke? I shook my head. I don't know anyone who'd do this. The envelope felt too deliberate, too recent to belong to the abandoned hut itself. As we debated whether to stay or leave, the wind shifted. Something moved just outside the clearing. A figure, crouched near a fallen tree. A man, maybe mid-40s, rugged, wearing a dark jacket. He didn't move toward us, just stared. His face was almost entirely hidden by shadow, but his presence was undeniably wrong. I tried calling out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge us at all, just stood there, frozen like a statue, before silently disappearing into the tree line. The forest seemed to exhale once he was gone. The hairs on my arms and neck stood up. We tried to settle in the hut for the night, but every sound, the creaking roof, the groan of the floorboards, even the soft whistle of the wind, felt amplified. Around midnight, the quiet became unbearable. Maya was asleep when I noticed a faint, rhythmic tapping. First soft, then louder, echoing against the wooden walls. My pulse quickened. It wasn't from the roof this time. The sound was beneath the hut, coming from somewhere below. There was a small trapdoor in the floor, half covered by rotted planks. My gut told me not to look, but curiosity got the better of me. Lifting the door, I shined my flashlight down the narrow steps. Fresh mud tracked up the stairs. Footprints, wet, recent. Maya stirred. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. The tapping stopped. The forest outside was silent, too silent. The air felt heavier, almost pressing in. I slammed the trapdoor shut and turned, only to see the shadow of someone, or something, moving across the cracked window panes. Maya sat up fully now, clutching her knees. "We need to leave," she said. We grabbed our bags, barely pausing to shut the door properly, and ran down the faint trail, hearts hammering, until we were back at the logging road. The forest behind us seemed endless, silent, watching, like it was aware we were leaving. When we reached the car, I tried calling the local ranger station to report what we saw, but the line was dead. Not busy, dead. I drove home in silence. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't go back, but even weeks later, I would dream about that shadowy figure, the envelope, and the fresh footprints under the hut, proof that someone or something had been there, waiting. And sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I swear I can still hear the tapping from beneath the floor, echoing in the back of my mind. After that night, Maya and I didn't speak about the Cedar Ridge hut for months. It felt safer to pretend it hadn't happened, even though neither of us could shake the memory. I kept replaying the shadow outside the window, the envelope, and those mud tracks under the floor. Something about that place didn't belong to the present or to the natural world at all. 1 week later, I couldn't resist reaching out to a retired ranger I'd once worked with, Tom Whitaker. I carefully avoided giving him the exact location, just describing the general area and the type of abandoned structure. His reaction chilled me instantly. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked, voice low. "That hut isn't just abandoned. Well, people have gone missing out there. Hunters, hikers, even Forest Service staff. No one talks about it publicly, but you were lucky to make it out." I pressed him for details, but he was careful. He told me only that the area had a long history of disappearances and strange encounters dating back to the 1960s. Trails would vanish, footprints would appear and disappear, and sometimes even the forest itself seemed to shift at night. He warned me again, with an intensity that left me cold. "Stay away. If you've already seen it, you're lucky. Most people aren't." A month later, curiosity gnawed at me, and I convinced Maya to go back, not to the hut, but to check the surrounding ridge in daylight. The forest was deceptively normal under the sun. Moss-covered rocks, leaning pines, the usual birdsong. But the hut clearing looked subtly different. The ground around the trapdoor was again disturbed, with faint, recent mud tracks leading toward the tree-line. We didn't stop to investigate. I had a gut feeling the figure we had seen before was watching us again, waiting or testing us. The unease never left, and by mid-afternoon we decided to hike back. As we moved down the faint trail, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadow of a tree low, deliberate. Not running, just moving parallel to us, almost like it was escorting us out. By the time we reached the logging road, I felt as though the forest itself was exhaling behind us. We got into the car without speaking and left immediately. Neither of us returned. In the weeks afterward, I kept thinking about that envelope. "See you." At first, I tried rationalizing it as a prank, maybe some local who had been living in the hut. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Who would leave a message like that, wait for someone to find it, and then vanish without a trace? Months later, I discovered a small online forum discussion where someone claimed to see a figure at the ridge, watching the hut, disappearing into the trees in the same area. The account was anonymous and disappeared within a week. The description matched what Maya and I had seen. Even now, nearly a year later, I sometimes hear something tapping from inside my apartment, soft, hollow, like the echo of those stairs under the hut. I know it's just my mind playing tricks, but part of me wonders if the hut still watches, if it remembers, if it knows. Maya and I still go hiking, still explore abandoned cabins here and there. But Cedar Ridge is off limits forever. There's something alive there, something patient and deliberate. And I've learned the hard way that curiosity can lead you straight to a place that doesn't want to be found. Some things, some places are meant to stay forgotten, and some warnings are never meant to be ignored. It was mid-October of 2022, and my friend Caleb and I had decided to take a detour from our usual urban exploration hobby. Instead of crumbling city buildings, we were chasing the idea of old lookout towers in the remote Ironwood Highlands. The only reason we knew about the place was a single post on a private Facebook group for hikers and abandoned locations. The post was vague. Someone had uploaded a grainy photo of a tall, weathered tower sitting on a hilltop surrounded by fog, and had warned that the location was not for casual visitors. Curiosity got the better of us. We messaged the poster, a man named Lars, who responded cautiously, almost reluctantly, giving us the coordinates on one condition: do not tell anyone, and stay safe. Don't go at night. We left early Saturday morning. The drive alone was unsettling. a narrow, winding road carved through dense pine and maple, with fog so thick it seemed to swallow headlights. By the time we parked at the trailhead, the sun was low, casting long shadows that stretched across the forest floor like fingers. The hike was brutal. No real trail existed, just faint impressions in the mud where previous hikers or maybe hunters had passed. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest was resisting our presence. Caleb joked to lighten the mood, but his laughter sounded hollow even to him. After nearly 2 hours, we reached a clearing, and the tower appeared. Unlike any tower we'd imagined, it wasn't perched on stilts or even fully vertical. It was crooked, leaning as if it had survived multiple storms that had warped its wooden frame. The siding was gray and rotted, the windows shattered, and one corner of the roof sagged dramatically. Ivy and moss had overtaken part of the structure, and the air around it felt colder, almost damp, despite the sun still peeking through the clouds. We approached cautiously. Caleb ran a hand along the doorframe. "Feels off," he muttered. Inside, it was darker than expected. The sun filtered in weakly through broken windows, casting faint, angular beams on the dust and debris scattered across the floor. Old tools, a shattered lantern, and cans that had long since rusted over were strewn about. But the thing that made us both stop was a small, handwritten note pinned to the wall above the stove. "Don't wake it." Neither of us laughed. Neither of us moved. The words were simple but heavy. Immediate tension settled in our chests like lead. We decided to stay the night, thinking daylight exploration might explain the note. As we tried to settle, we noticed a faint scratching sound coming from the floorboards. First, we thought it was the wind. Then it became rhythmic, almost like deliberate footsteps pacing under the tower. Caleb grabbed a flashlight and crouched near the corner, shining it toward the floor. There was nothing visible, just warped wood and dust. But the sound continued, precise, deliberate, growing louder. I leaned toward him, whispering, "Did you hear that?" He nodded. "It's coming from below." There was a trapdoor in the far corner of the floor, partially hidden under an old rug. Neither of us wanted to open it, but curiosity gnawed at us. Caleb slowly lifted the door, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. Fresh, muddy footprints ran up and down the steps. Not old, not decades old. Fresh. The scratching stopped the moment the trapdoor opened. Silence. Then, from somewhere outside, a branch snapped sharply. Both of us froze. I swung the flashlight toward the window. A shadow flitted past the edge of the clearing, tall, hunched, and moving impossibly fast. Caleb whispered, "We're not alone." The air grew thick. The tower itself seemed to groan, as if warning us to leave. That's exactly what we did. We grabbed our packs and started down the faint trail, running whenever the uneven ground allowed. Behind us, the tower loomed, silent again, hiding whatever had been pacing below the floorboards and following our every move. By the time we reached the car, the sun had set completely. The forest was quiet again, but the unease lingered. Caleb didn't speak for the entire drive home. I didn't either. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching that clearing. The note, the footprints, the shadow, all of it suggests we weren't just trespassing. We were intruding on something patient, something that has been waiting for anyone foolish enough to step inside the Ironwood Tower. The next morning, neither Caleb nor I wanted to return to the tower, but neither of us could stop thinking about the note. "Don't wake it." Something about those words felt like more than a warning. They felt like a plea. I spent the entire day researching the Ironwood Highlands, old fire towers, and ranger reports, hoping to find a logical explanation. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak in my apartment sounded like the groan of rotting wood. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the heater or the apartment settling, but it persisted, deliberate and rhythmic, like footsteps moving across a wooden floor. My heart raced as I realized it matched the pattern from the tower. I shook it off as imagination, but when I checked the front window, my breath caught. In the faint glow of the streetlight, I could see a shadow crouched just beyond the tree line behind my building, watching. Not human, or at least not fully. Its movements were jagged, unnatural. I called Caleb immediately. His voice was tense but relieved to hear me. "I've been hearing it too," he said. "Same tapping, same presence." We agreed to meet the next day at a cafe and recount everything. As we compared experiences, a terrifying pattern emerged. Both of us had felt observed the moment we left the tower. Both of us had nightmares of the shadow moving impossibly fast. And both of us had seen footprints, fresh mud tracks, inside the tower despite no one being there. Curiosity, our old, reckless curiosity, was now replaced with dread. We realized the tower wasn't just abandoned. Something lived there, something that waited for intruders, something patient, intelligent, and hungry for attention. Weeks later, unable to resist, I returned to the Ironwood Highlands, but not to the tower itself. I drove along the logging road and stopped just at the edge of the clearing. From a distance, the tower looked as innocuous as any weathered structure, but the air around it was thick, almost vibrating. I could swear I saw a figure at the window, hunched and staring, its shape blurred by shadow and moss. I didn't approach. I left immediately, keeping my distance. That was the first and last time I returned. Caleb agreed. The tower had claimed its space, and we had no right to challenge it. Now, even months later, I feel its presence in my dreams. The tapping, the shadow, the feeling of being watched. It follows me. I've told this story to a few close friends, and they laugh it off as my imagination. But I know better. I know that somewhere up in the Ironwood Highlands, the old lookout tower waits silently. And if you ever wander too close, if you ever pry open its door, it will notice. And when it does, it will not forget. And last, I want to say, stay safe out there and always trust your instincts. Some places are better admired from a distance, and some mysteries are better left untouched. Take care of yourself and the people you explore with.